for the annual Prince Lecture at the school, which is an endowed lecture that was established about 30 years ago, where we bring back a speaker, and there's a community forum in the evening. We had a very nice crowd sort of filling most of this center section last night. And today our speaker comes and speaks at the upper school. So this lecture is part of that series, and I'm pleased that we're welcoming back a Nichols alumnus today, Mr. Matt Lee, who is class of 1984. And he is currently the Chief State Department Correspondent for the Associated Press. So he's covering, at the moment, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and all her travels, and he can probably elaborate on that a little bit as well. But after Nichols, Mr. Lee went to school in Scotland for a year, and then he graduated from the Georgetown School of Foreign Service. And then he began his craft of writing. And like many of you, his roots in writing were here at the school, and I think he'll probably talk about that as well. But he ended up working for a French news agency in Cambodia, the AFP. And he was in Cambodia for many years before he then went with AFP to Africa. And then he joined the AP and came back to Washington, where he's been following now 4 secretaries of state. So I think he's going to share with you a little bit of his love of writing and share with you his roots of writing here, and maybe the Nichols Global connection around the world that he talked a little bit about last night, and I think will be very interesting to all of you. But I got to tell you what a thrill it is to welcome back an alumnus who actually didn't sit in the same seats you did, because in 1984, all we did was sit in metal folding chairs in the gym. It was the only place the school could gather. So there's been a lot of changes since then. And we've got beautiful venues like this. But there are some things that really stay the same, and that is that we continue to produce, like all of you, people who are very talented and are really involved in many global perspectives. So Matt, it's welcome back. Welcome back.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. I spoke a lot last night, and I was going to try and make this as short as possible, so that if there are any questions, you all have plenty of time to answer them. As Mr. Bryan said, I was once sitting here, not here, but over in the gym back in the 1980s, listening to whoever the teachers, administrators thought it was important that we should be listening to. What I want to tell you is that my time here at Nichols is really where I learned how to do what I do. More, I can say, than my college education. What I learned here in terms of how to write and also how to read, and read voraciously quite a bit, it really was great preparation for what I do now, even though at the time I had no idea, even after I graduated from college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. So what do I do? Like Mr. Bryan said, I work for the Associated Press. And if you don't know, the AP is a wire service. It is one of the world's oldest. It was founded back during the Civil War, when newspapers in the North and the South wanted to get unbiased reporting from what was going on out on the battlefield. What I do is I cover U.S. foreign policy. I write with my colleagues the news about how America relates to the rest of the world. And that news ends up on newspapers. If anyone still reads newspapers. It ends up though also on the internet, which I'm sure you all look at. This news is what you hear on the radio. It's what you see on television. What I write about in particular, I have colleagues all over the world, in pretty much every country that there is, but what I write about peace negotiations, about how the current president and past presidents want to handle things like Afghanistan, like the Middle East, Iraq. In my job, which I've done for some time now, as Mr. Bryant said, for 4 secretaries of state, I travel all over the world. We fly in the same plane as the secretary does, the same Air Force plane, which when the vice president flies on it is called Air Force 2. When we fly on it, it's called something less exciting. But we fly all over the world, and what I do is to ask tough questions, I hope tough questions, of the Secretary of State, whoever it is, and of the foreign officials that he or she meets, to try and find out what's really going on, beyond the hype, beyond what the standard line of whatever administration it is. And I learned to ask those tough questions here at Nichols. I've run into a bunch of ex-Nichols or former Nichols students in my travels. Just earlier this month, I was in Calcutta in India, and I met a guy, Tad Brown, I believe his last name is, who was a class in 1995. He works for the U.S. consulate in Calcutta. And it was really kind of a thrill to run into someone who was, well, not just from Buffalo, but also went to Nichols. I had a classmate in 1984 named Piper Campbell, some of you might have heard about, who's a diplomat now, and she is going to be the next ambassador to Mongolia. I ran into Piper a couple weeks ago in Washington, and I told her I was going to be speaking here, and she said, "What on earth are you going to tell them?" And I said, "I really didn't have any idea." She said, "Well, be careful, they're also young and unjaded." And I said to her that I hoped that they wouldn't be unjaded, that I would jade them. I don't think that I'm going to be able to do that, though. You all look like a pretty worldly bunch. Anyway, if you want to see what I do, you can Google my name and AP, the Associated Press. See me in the briefing room that you saw up there, asking what I hope are these tough questions of the State Department spokesperson. But before those videos were made, before those briefings, I was a reporter, as Mr. Bryant said, in Africa and in Southeast Asia. And in 1997, I was in a country called Cambodia, and I got shot in a coup d'etat that happened. I was having dinner with some friends of mine. We heard gunfire and explosions. I went driving, fortunately for me, right into the middle of a firefight, and I got hit. It wasn't a bad wound. I was lucky, but it was scary. I was also mad, and it made me even more want to ask questions of people who were in power, people with the guns, why they were doing what they were doing. And in a lot of ways, that incident, me being shot, and you can pull up the picture, it's actually made news. You know, reporters aren't supposed to be the news, they're supposed to write about the news. But that picture, which you'll see in color in a second, I hope, that is me not wearing any pants after getting shot. I still have that shirt. I was really upset though, because in Cambodia I had a maid, and she was horrified by this, and she washed it. I wanted to save it and have it framed with all that blood on it. But I still have it. It's still got the holes where the bullet went in. Anyway, that picture, I'm on the phone. I was calling this in to my editors in Bangkok, calling in the story about the coup, but the most important phone call I had to make that day was back here to Buffalo, because after I got shot, the news of it was spreading. There were rumors that I had died, and I had to call my parents and tell them. So I called, and I made a big mistake, because I told my mom when she answered, I said, "Mom, listen, before I say anything else, don't worry, I'm okay." That completely freaked her out. I didn't even get a chance to tell her why I was calling, because she had just assumed the absolute worst. And I was just reminded by her last night that about an hour after I had called, she did get a call from someone else who had, from a paper that I worked at in Virginia, asking if I was dead. Thank God she was able to say, no, he wasn't dead. That I wasn't dead. Anyway, that experience really, you know, as I said, shaped my career. It made me angry. I wanted to know why. And so I brought that back to the States and brought it to my job at the State Department. And the reason that I tell that story is because it was a kind of a defining moment in my career. And I think that it's something that it doesn't, that it's something that shaped me in a way that nothing really else did. And I think that it's important for you all to realize and to seize on some defining moment in your life. Hopefully it's not getting shot, because you know, bullets and blood are not really the way to go. It's you know, hopefully this defining moment will be something that's less stressful to you and to your parents. But you really should seize on it, use it as an opportunity, and make the best of it. And in a lot of ways, that's the kind of thing that I learned here way back when, 28 years ago, when I graduated. Anyway, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you might have about travel. I can tell you lots of stories if you want, or not. And just thanks for having me speak. I'll open it up to questions. You didn't get to this part last night. There's some pictures that I was going to show that I didn't get a chance to. But just to give you an idea of some of what we do, you can throw up that temple picture if you want. Fine. Yeah, there it is. So that is the traveling press corps that travels with Hillary Clinton. I'm right, you can see me wearing this kind of standard uniform that I wear, which is white shirt and jeans, right next to Hillary Clinton. There are about 15 or 16 of us that travel with her all over the place. This was a big trip. She was the first this is in Burma, in Rangoon, at a temple there. And she was the first Secretary of State to go to Burma since World War II. And so this was something of a big deal. And this was, we all had, and this picture was taken when you go to this temple, you have to take off your shoes. And it was here that we discovered that Hillary Clinton paints her toenails blue, the color of her suit. The other thing that was kind of funny about that is that you saw all of her security guards walking around in bare feet, and her security guards don't have very pretty feet. So anyway, there's another photo, I think, of me, just me and the Secretary of State, and me. There we go. This is taken in Cape Town, South Africa, on another trip, where we had a cocktail party. About an hour or so before this picture was taken, Hillary Clinton was dancing in the streets with a bunch of women who she had first met when she was the First Lady, when her husband Bill was president, and they'd gone there and started a housing cooperative. Anyway, what I do is a lot of fun. There are a lot of moments like this, but it's also there are also some very difficult times as well. So anyway, those are just a couple of pictures to show you what I've done. And if anyone wants to ask any questions, please fire away. Yeah.
What's the most interesting story you ever covered?
Well, the most interesting story that I covered, I think it also had to do with the most interesting trip I ever took with the Secretary of State, which was to North Korea. This was with Madeleine Albright in 2000. And I don't know how much you know about North Korea, but it's really it is the world's last Stalinist country. Everything is incredibly regimented. And the country is dirt poor. There's nothing really pleasant about it at all. People people are indoctrinated into the idea that the ruling family, the Kim family, are essentially gods on earth, and that people walk around just kind of mindlessly. We flew in, the city is empty, there's very little light. There's a famous satellite picture showing North and South Korea at night. South Korea is all lit up, electricity. North Korea is completely dark. So there's virtually no electricity in town. It's a really weird place. I don't know if you ever saw this movie, The Truman Show, but it is basically the city of Pyongyang is a Potemkin village of storefronts that have, you know, shampoo and items in the windows, but really behind them, behind the shelves, there's nothing. It's just empty. There's not even a way to get into the store. Anyway, we went with Madeleine Albright to a stadium to see a mass gymnastics show. And this stadium, they've indoctrinated people so much that the stadium was filled. It is bigger than the Ralph Wilson Stadium. It's huge. It's called Mayday Stadium. And when we got there, it was totally silent, and we thought it was actually empty. We walked in, and in fact, it was filled to capacity. And all these people were just sitting there totally silent until the leader, Kim Jong-il at the time, and Madeleine Albright walked out. And once they did, this place exploded in applause. People were literally jumping. These are older people too, literally jumping up and down. They were crying because they were seeing their dear leader for the first time. So that was probably one of the most interesting things that I've seen, but it was also very scary. And again, made me want to ask the questions of these people. You know, why is it you do what you want to do? This Cambodia story, that was also very interesting, but and getting shot was not fun, but it certainly made an impact on my career. Anyone else?
Have you ever been censored or edited in such a way you felt your words were not being...
No, I've been very, very lucky that way. The agencies that I've worked for, and I worked for 2 newspapers before that, the Washington Post and a small paper in Virginia, and my editors have always been very good, and I have not had to worry about that at all. Now, a lot of my colleagues around the world who work for other organizations, especially in countries that aren't democratic, oppressive, face this problem of censorship all the time and are allowed to write what they want. And you know, it's a free press is really what keeps governments accountable to the people. People asking these questions about why you're doing what you're doing and how much of our money you're spending on doing it. And so censorship around the world is really it's a pernicious and nasty thing. So I've been very lucky not to ever had censored myself or been censored. There's sometimes for national security reasons that we hold off on writing stories, but that is only to protect what lives or or policies that are very sensitive. But I've never had a problem with censorship. Yes.
Out of the 4 Secretary of States that you worked for, which one was your favorite?
That's a good question. Well, I'll tell you, the most fun is her. I don't know if you know anything about her, but she was a senator after she was First Lady. She was senator from New York. She came to Buffalo quite a bit, and she likes to have a good time. She likes to see sights, and she likes to bring us along for them, like you saw at the temple in Burma. The Secretary of State, who before Hillary Clinton was Condoleezza Rice, and before her was Colin Powell, and before her was Madeleine Albright, which means that after Secretary Clinton finishes her term, which will be sometime in January or February, there will not have been a white male Secretary of State since Warren Christopher for more than 12 years. It'll be 16 years, I think. Madeleine Albright was the first woman. Colin Powell was the first African American. Condoleezza Rice was the first African American woman. And now the first former First Lady to be Secretary of State. And what I can say about that progression is that I think that it shows that America, for all of its faults, has really come to embrace diversity, at least in the job of this top diplomatic job, which is representing being the face of America to countries, to other countries around the world. But anyway, Hillary Clinton has been the most fun so far to work with. That's for sure. Anyone else? Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about WikiLeaks and what happened on that?
Sure. So I don't know if you all know the story behind WikiLeaks, but in Iraq there was an army, he wasn't an officer, he had a soldier, a low-level soldier, who had access to basically every single diplomatic cable that the State Department had, that embassies around the world had written back to Washington for quite some time. A cable is what the ambassador or what the ambassador's staff sends to Washington so that they can better know what's going on in the country. Anyway, this guy, we think, gave all of these cables to WikiLeaks, which then published them online, and you can go and read them. Most of them are incredibly boring. They talk about, the price of rice in a certain country, or what the inflation rate is, or the unemployment rate. But some of it was kind of interesting. It talked about world leaders and their faults or their sins, which ones had drinking problems, which ones had mistresses, which ones, had elaborate weddings, hired people like Beyonce to play for their son's birthday parties, spending millions and millions of dollars. And it created a bit of a crisis at the time because because these things are supposed to be secret. They weren't supposed to be shared publicly. And a lot of world leaders, especially those who were identified as cheating on their wives or whatever, were quite upset. And there was a period of time where American diplomats abroad were not being given information. People wouldn't talk to them because they thought that what they said would get out. That said, foreign policy and the practice of diplomacy it goes on. And I think that the damage that was done by WikiLeaks in the short term, which caused the ambassador to Libya, for example, had to leave his post because when Colonel Gaddafi, who was still alive then and still running the country, found out what this ambassador had written about him, he was really pissed off, and he sent his goons out to threaten him. And so he ended up leaving the country. The Mexicans were so upset about what the ambassador to Mexico had written about them and about links between the government and drug lords that he had to leave Mexico. And then there were people who were identified in these cables as being sources of information who the U.S. had to take away and protect, to give asylum to, because they had revealed something very sensitive about what was going on in their country. Anyway, that was the short-term impact. The longer-term impact is that these countries still have to get along with the United States, and they know it. And so over the longer term, the impact, I think, has been a lot less than what was originally feared. Yes?
The fact that you have an ongoing relationship with the Secretary of State, does it make it more difficult to ask hard questions?
Yeah, you don't want to be really badgering someone hard and to the point of being somewhat obnoxious when you want to have a good and at least friendly professional relationship with the Secretary. Whoever that is. I tend to be a little bit harder and more obnoxious on the spokesperson, whose job it is to take my flack every day, than I am on the same. That doesn't mean that the questions are necessarily different, but the tone certainly is. I have to say that I'm probably more polite in talking to the person at top, just because of respect for the office, rather than it's respect for the office more than it is anything else. It's the same reason that reporters stand up when the president, whoever the president is, comes into the room. It's not necessarily because of personal friendship or whatever. It is out of respect for the office. And so in the briefing rooms, with a spokesperson who is paid to respond to annoying or persistent and obnoxious questions, my tone can be a little bit harsher than it is with the secretary. But everything in the end is done on I would hope that these people would understand that it's all done on a professional basis. I wouldn't say that I was a friend of any of them. I mean, these are people that we have to cover, it's our job. But when you travel together as much as we do, it's impossible not to have some kind of a personal relationship. The Secretary Clinton talks about her daughter all the time. Talks about her husband a bit, not a whole lot, enough. So it's good. You get there is some benefit to having a semi-friendly relationship with these people. But at the end of the day, we're not in their world. We are in a different world. Our job, some would say, the job of journalists is to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. And so there's got to be some distance. Anyone else?